Dr. Bryan Carter. Dr. Carter is currently the director of the Center for Digital Humanities and is a professor of Africana Studies at the University of Arizona. He specializes in African American literature of the 20th century with a primary focus on the Harlem Renaissance. His research also focuses on digital humanities and Africana studies. He's published numerous articles on his doctoral project, Virtual Harlem, which you'll hear about tonight, which is an immersive representation of a portion of Harlem, New York, as it existed during the 1920s Jazz Age and the Harlem Renaissance. So, super cool. I'll also add that he completed his first book, Digital Humanities Current Perspectives, Practice, and Research. And his second book is Afrofuturism Experiencing Culture Through Technology. And that was published in 2022. So thank you all for joining us. And with that, we will hand it over to Dr. Carter.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much. And I hope you all can hear me. Is my audio okay, Elizabeth? Fantastic. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you very much, Elizabeth and Laura, for the very kind invitation to present this workshop on the Harlem Renaissance. I saw in the chat window where someone was anticipating this workshop because they love teaching the Harlem Renaissance. That's my favorite subject as well. And out of all the classes I teach here, the Harlem Renaissance and another course, a companion course that's related to it called "When African Americans Came to Paris." Are my two favorite courses, and when you teach those back to back, it's really kind of cool. And here at the University of Arizona, we've even added another twist to that second course, where students take a field trip to Paris over spring break to experience all the things that we've been studying throughout the semester. So it's always a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead and get going with what we have planned for today. And hopefully, you'll not only go away with some things that you can perhaps implement into your classrooms, but also maybe some increasing your knowledge about maybe some tools that perhaps you have heard about or maybe have used a little bit, but may not necessarily have incorporated them into your methodologies. And so we'll talk about some of that as well. Now, I do understand that not everyone has access to the same kinds of resources at your schools. Some of you may have computers in your classroom. Some may have to go to a computer lab. Some may not have any of access to those kinds of things. Depending on your district or your schools, some may allow students to use mobile devices, some may not, and some may even block access to certain websites. And I know it's different all over the nation and perhaps even district by district. So I'm hoping that at least among the tools that you'll have access to, that at least many of them will make it through your firewall, or that your students will have access to, or that you'll have the resources to give them access to certain types of things. As we move into a more advanced digital age, of course, the resources required to access those are getting a bit more stringent. And also the regulations that some districts or schools have implemented that either allow or disallow access to certain websites. Maybe another conversation has to be held regarding some of that, because some sites are designated gaming, and I know that sometimes those are blocked. And so putting all of that out front, just to let you know that I am aware that there are intersectional differences between all of you and all of your districts, all of your individual schools. And so I'm just aware of that. So I hope that today you'll find something that will not only interest you, but also that you'll find to be quite useful for your classes. Experiencing the Harlem Renaissance is a topic that I have seen evolve over a number of years, and the reason I say that is because as I've been working with technology since the late '90s, of course, we've definitely seen the technology change, but we've also seen the adoption and the acceptance of it change among faculty members, among schools, and among students. Believe it or not, not all students like this kind of stuff, and so we've seen that change. We've also seen a lot of controversy regarding some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And I know that in your schools or maybe in your districts, you've probably had some of these conversations as well. So before we get started, you got to know who I am. And I think this is really important because when you think about the way that we've incorporated technology into our classes or even the choices that we make, that's based on something, right? And so this is my story. Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we were just talking about the chilly weather, both here in Arizona and there, and how we sometimes either do or don't get used to it. So I am used to colder weather, and it's chilly here today in Tucson, Arizona. 10 years in the Air Force. And I went to the Air Force because all of my relatives are teachers. My mother was a teacher, her sister was a teacher, their mother was a teacher, and all of their mother's siblings were in school systems, either as administrators or as teachers. And so when I grew up, I tried to get as far away from teaching as I could. And after spending 10 years in the Air Force and becoming a trainer, and then getting out of the Air Force with an English degree, what did I end up doing? Of course, becoming a teacher. I got into the secondary education system through a program called the Alternative Secondary Certification Program. You may have something similar to that in Texas. After having just received my English degree from a university in Hawaii, I applied for many jobs, and here in Arizona, I was hired in Globe, Arizona, and I was the first African American middle school teacher in Globe. And that was so much fun. I learned so much being in the classroom for the first time. And of course, with that secondary certification, you have to either earn your master's in secondary teaching or get secondary certified within 2 years. So I got the master's degree and then started a PhD program at the University of Missouri, Columbia. And it was in Columbia that I really got started into this whole technological thing. And this was back in the mid 90s. And in 1996, 97 is when technology just really exploded in my mind with regards to the way that it could be used in the classroom. Taught at University of Central Missouri for about 14 years, and then I've been here at the University of Arizona for the last 12 years. And as you already know, in Africana Studies, I teach African American literature, Harlem Renaissance, when African Americans came to Paris, Afrofuturism, and then, of course, the intro courses, Intro to Africana Studies and Intro to African American Studies, are all a part of the staple that I teach here. As a result of some of the things that I've been doing with technology since the 90s, I was asked to become the director, the first director of the Center for Digital Humanities here. And at the center, I have maybe 18 students that work for me that are paid student developers with a range in majors from film, television, and media to computer science to animation and drawing and game studies and everything in between. And they work on small developmental projects, real world projects ranging from advanced websites to 3D scanning and so many different things, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, etc. And so as a result of my interest in this technology, the Center for Digital Humanities has been the locus of not only some of the research that I've been doing, but also some of the ways that we as a center have been helping to achieve our university's mission, our land grant mission of reaching out to the community and exposing the community to a number of these really cool technologies. So we got to go back a little bit because when you think about how even virtual reality has evolved just over the last 10 years, and that sounds like a long time, and it is, but when you think about for virtual reality, it's an eternity, and it has changed. Oh gosh, more than you can possibly imagine. Back in 1997, when I started working with VR, I had a team of maybe 8 people that were computer scientists and computer graphics individuals. We had a large budget, and we created an amazing experience called the Virtual Harlem Project. I was teaching Harlem Renaissance courses during my PhD program and applied for a small grant that was on the campus of the University of Missouri Columbia for faculty members to make use of this brand new technology at the time called virtual reality. Now, this is back in 1996, and only 3 people three faculty members, actually two, and then myself, apply for this opportunity, and Virtual Harlem was picked up. And we went through a number of very interesting collaborations and learning experiences on how to actually use virtual reality in a humanities setting. It had already been, incorporated into various STEM fields for simulations, but in the humanities, it was very, very few and far between. We had collaborations with the University of Illinois Chicago and Urbana-Champaign. They were the ones that developed an environment called the cave. And you can see that on the top right hand corner. The cave is an environment that was a 10 by 10 square foot room where the walls are backlit video displays. You can see kind of an example of that on the left hand side. And those walls basically tracked the head movements of one user wearing a VR, I'm sorry, AR glasses. And that user is the person that's standing there with the wires coming down. Yeah, we had to wear big, heavy cables back then. And wherever that person looked, the entire scene would shift for everyone else in the room wearing passive 3D glasses. So it appeared that things were floating out at you, but only one person really controlled the movement through the space. And that was our first foray into a massive multi-user environment, at least from the terminology back then, because there weren't any of these environments that were full VR where more than one person could get into the environment and experience certain things. And as educators started to become more and more involved in virtual reality, we wanted to have more and more people in this space. This is a screenshot of the early version of Virtual Harlem. And you can see where we had some pretty good graphics. Took me months to find enough images before the graphic artist could even get to work. And so and because of size limitations, we were using a platform called Multigen at the time. Because of space and size and the size of these files, we had to crunch everything together. So we know that the Lafayette Theater wasn't right next door to the Savoy Ballroom or across from the Savoy and across from the Apollo. And all these other clubs weren't like crunched together like this. But for these purposes, we did that. And the cardboard people, would always face you. But when students got into this space and they could wander around, and we had audio files of people in alleys telling stories, and we had music playing and coming out of the clubs, and you could look in the window of the Lafayette Theater and see a performance of
Hey, boo
Voodoo
boo.
Macbeth. I'm sorry. And you can see a performance of Voodoo Macbeth going on, and you could look out the window of another club that you could go inside, and you could see a parade of Marcus Garvey going by. And so all these things enthused students, and when I took them into our one walled cave at the University of Missouri, and one person was driving around, the students couldn't take their eyes off the screen, and they were looking around, and they were telling the student to go down this alley and go here, and they wanted to explore. And then students started raising their hand. They were like, how can we add more stuff to this? I want to do this, and wouldn't it be cool if we could have this? And this was in 1997. That's when I realized that students not didn't just want to passively explore these places, which was cool. And it was the first time that we could, take students back in time to experience the Harlem Renaissance in some way, shape, or form, so they can get some sort of contextual understanding of the inspirations of the work of Hughes and Nella Larson and many of the others who wrote from within that sort of urban setting. But here's where I realized that they wanted to be builders. They wanted to contribute to the building and the making and the evolution of this space. And that's when I knew that digital humanities really had some legs to it. Now, my dissertation committee didn't realize that, and so we had to make some changes there. But overall, you know what I'm talking about. Now, in 2004, 2005, that's when a lot of us were really new to these virtual worlds, and we craved a multi-user environment. Remember, before Virtual Harlem, a person could put on a headset and they were the only ones there, but they could still wander through the space and do all the stuff. Unless you were in a cave or something, then more of you could be there. You could talk to one another, but really just one person had control and did the interaction. Virtual Harlem was then later moved into an environment called Second Life. And many of you may remember this massive multi-user environment. For those of us that were into these virtual worlds, Second Life was amazing. In 2004, when this came online, we were throwing, our content into this. In fact, it just wasn't educators, it was the entire world, it seems like. I know there were millions of people that were subscribed to this. For those of you that aren't familiar with this environment or are scratching your brain or now remembering how popular it was, you know that embassies had a presence there. We know that many universities were building, at that time it wasn't called this, but they were building digital twins of their campuses, and they were holding classes in basically a virtual representation of their campus, or a twin. And businesses had representation there. Political candidates had representation. I mean, everybody was in Second Life. In fact, there was even a currency there, and a functioning economic system where people could buy and sell virtual goods and services. In fact, some of my students started small businesses in Second Life, and they got paid, and they could cash their Linden dollars in for real dollars through PayPal, and it was really quite lucrative for some people. In fact, there were people making three figures, of money per week, just buying and selling virtual goods and services. What I found from this environment is that students really enjoyed the collaborative nature of this, the visually collaborative nature. They built museums like the Hellfighter Museum. They had collaborations with students in Paris that I was also teaching at the Sorbonne, and they had collaborations with them, and they met at times that were suitable for the different time zones. And they built museums that were dedicated to, and nightclubs that were dedicated to Montmartre, which was, of course, inherently connected to the Harlem Renaissance, because folks are going back and forth, and that sort of reflexive activity that was happening between folks that were getting out of the service in World War I, and then going right back to Paris and becoming musicians and entertainers, and then staying there for a while, then coming back to the United States, and bringing that information from that they've learned from French musicians and culture to the U.S., and changing it a little bit, then going back to Paris. So that reflexive kind of activity that was going on was really quite exciting. And the students got a lot out of that as well. And they loved that interaction. The massive multi-user engagement was something that hadn't been done before educationally in virtual environments. We could even do simulations where I had students put on badges that symbolized their ethnicity, and we were doing a lesson on the clubs that were represented in Harlem, and we had everybody try and go into the front door of the Cotton Club. Well, we all know that if they were identified as African American or Black, then they couldn't go in the front door, and they were really kind of off put that they had to go around to the side door, and then they were automatically given a uniform for either a waiter or a waitress or an entertainer, and they couldn't understand that either. And so there's where we got to have a really interesting conversation about some of the policies that were inherently incorporated in the Cotton Club and some of the other clubs during that time. Now we know that things have changed dramatically since the late 90s, even since over the last couple of years. And as we begin to, sort of evolve our thinking from full-on virtual environments like virtual Harlem, or the massive multi-user online environments, and there are still quite a few there. In fact, Second Life is still online, and there are quite a few others that have sprouted up since then. Um, we have to look at how, as a result of the evolution of technology, that of course our methods have to evolve as well. Students are changing, and even the generation that's being born now, that won't know any other world that existed without AI or these kinds of advanced technologies. We've got to change our methods in order to not only attract that generation, but keep that generation's attention and engage them very differently. So when I think about teaching the Harlem Renaissance with digital tools, excuse me, boy, we've got some really fun ones that are just the tip of the iceberg. And if we had more time, I could definitely love to show you more. Now, I'm going to give you, or at least give you this caveat up front. These slides were made using one of the AI applications that I use all the time, and we know that sometimes these AI applications have a difficult time spelling words. So so please forgive any misspellings that you see on some of these slides. They aren't me. They're the application's fault, and sometimes it can be a little challenging to go in and change things with the same font or same style. So please forgive that up front. So, when you think about the Harlem Renaissance, most people, or a lot of people, teach this as a literary movement. And most students know this movement as mostly a literary and perhaps even an entertainment movement. And there are ways, of course, that we can engage students, even those that don't necessarily understand or are very good at literary analysis. We can engage them very differently using some of these tools. And I love the way that these tools, the learning curve for many of these tools has come down to the point where we don't have to be in our classroom experts at how these tools work, but we can be very good at manipulating them so that they suit our purposes. We may not be able to explain large language models to our students, but we can definitely use one and show them this is the result. If you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get this result as a result of that. And so AI has really changed everything. And I know that probably every school district in the country, in the world, probably has talked about the implications of artificial intelligence into teaching and learning and plagiarism and all the things that are the pros and cons as a result of the incorporation of AI and its rapid evolution. And of course, some are very anti AI, and some districts have taken this sort of knee jerk approach and ban everything, right? And some are being a bit more, sort of thoughtful with regards to the benefits of AI. But yeah, we still got to put some guardrails around this, and some are, just sort of hands off, where anything goes. We'll let the teacher handle it. Okay, and so it's all over the place, and I'm not sure where your district has. You know what my background is, and so as a result of all the things that I told you about me and my directing of the Center for Digital Humanities, I am definitely sort of more in favor of the use of artificial intelligence. And I know that's a huge catchphrase for all the different varieties that you're going to experience here in just a bit. But when you talk about AI as a category, I'm really enthusiastic about its use and about the way that we can sort of leverage it for teaching and learning and understanding and engagement and interaction and all the things that it can do very well. I'm also very cognizant about the way that it can be leveraged or used by students and by faculty sometimes, or teachers, to do things that could be harmful or that aren't necessarily as productive. And so we do have to look at this technology with a very sort of stringent eye. Now, one of of course, the most popular tools that is out there right now is ChatGPT, and you have access to these tools, and all these links are active. I've just got the tabs already open at the top of my screen, so I'm just going to go tab to tab. But when you look at the presentation, it should open another website for you for these particular tools that have been identified. What I've also tried to do in these various options here is align the use of the tool with the text alignment that you can see here. And so I've tried to identify the section in those standards that will sort of justify your use of these various tools, so that you won't see that using them is sort of takes you out of your flow or whatever the case might be. So ChatGPT, for those of you that have not used it, I know almost everyone has, but if you've not made very much use of it outside of just the chat agent, you can do some really cool things with configuring a model that can really represent something or someone very different. Now, what I've done here is I've created a chat GPT for Marcus Garvey, and it's so easy for you to, once again, I say easy. If you have access to this and your students have access to something like this, it is not difficult to create an agent that can be then imbued with certain bits of information, background history, biographical information, the method in which you'd like for it to respond, etc. So that if students were given an assignment on, say, creating an agent or a bot for Marcus Garvey, they're going to have to do some research. They're going to have to do some critical thinking about what's most important, for someone to engage with a bot related to a historic character. They're going to have to put enough information there so that it can answer questions accurately. And so if I were to type a question in here, tell me about your ideas related to economic empowerment. And let's see what it says here. Economic empowerment lies at the very foundation of my vision of the upliftment of African people worldwide. It's not merely the pursuit of wealth for wealth's sake, but the establishment of independence, dignity, self-reliance for our race. Allow me to outline the pillars of this philosophy, and it goes into basically the pillars that he espoused through the United Negro Improvement Association. And so by feeding this chat agent a wealth of information that either you or your students can identify, they can have a conversation with Marcus Garvey. They can ask Marcus Garvey various questions about his personal life, about his upbringing, about his background, about his philosophy, about his Back to Africa movement, about the 3 ships that he bought and one of which sunk in the harbor, about the reverse triangular trade route. All these things that students could identify, and then imagine them exchanging bots or having to go around and learn about the Harlem Renaissance through the use of through the method of talking with historic characters, right? So this is one of those bots that can actually be created for free, believe it or not. Another of these sort of chat agents is a platform called Character AI. And it's one of many of these character creation sort of tools. And it basically does very similar functionality as ChatGPT, where once you've created a free account, you can then add information, background information on the character that you've created or the persona that you're creating. You can add information about how it's going to greet people when it first encounters them, and you can see the greeting that I've asked this chat bot to greet people with, and then I can ask it the same question. What was the question I asked before? Tell me about your ideas related to economic empowerment. Let's see if I can do that again. Your ideas. And let's see what this one says. I'm not sure if it's going to have the same thing. Economic empowerment is the cornerstone of any meaningful progress. My vision: champion reliance, entrepreneurship, etc., thriving Black-owned businesses and enterprises, etc. So he goes into more of the Black nationalist sort of speak in some ways, and based on the limited amount of information that I fed it, you can see that the response isn't quite as lengthy as that of ChatGPT, which could actually go out to the web and pull more information if you configure it to do that. So here's where you have a couple of good examples, and this is again just the tip of the iceberg. A couple of good examples on how to engage students based on the historic figures that are, of course, were very prominent during this period, and how to get them to learn not only through the research, the primary sources that they would use to build these chat agents, but also being able to talk to the different ones that maybe their classmates have identified and learn directly from the individual, right? So it really gives a different kind of approach with regards to learning about the Harlem Renaissance. Now, you notice I start with this sort of conversation about Marcus Garvey. Actually, when I teach my Harlem Renaissance courses, I go back a few more years to right at the turn of the 20th century when W.E.B. Du Bois took those amazing photographs over to Paris with him for the big exposition that was happening there, the Paris exposition, and how remember how you won the gold medal for the photographs that showed African Americans in a light that was outside of the sort of stereotypical slavery perspective that most of the world had of Black people in America. And so when you think about even the power of visuals, here's where by starting there, it allows me to sort of prime students that something was happening, something's different than the antebellum period, because folks are doing things differently. They're presenting Black people differently. They're writing different kinds of novels. They're forming different kinds of organizations, right? Remember the Niagara movement, and then that evolved into the NAACP. So these organizations are forming differently, and to get students into this idea that, hey, wait a minute, something's a little bit different now. Something's going to change, and something's really about to pop off. And then, of course, World War I happens, but then you got the Hellfighters. So you have all these things but by the time we get to 1919, Red Summer, and by the time we get to, when those troops are mustering out, and some stay in the United States, and, going back through the same old thing that Du Bois said wasn't going to happen as a result of fighting in World War I, and some saying, forget that. I've seen how the other side lives when I was in Paris, right? And they go back. And so there is where you really prime students that not only is something different happening in the United States somewhat, but also overseas that hardly anybody knows about. You got to, it really gets them excited about, okay, now that we know something's different happening, how is this explosion manifesting itself? And how can I understand that a little bit differently? Well, when I start thinking about, of course, the different ways that we can get students to imagine how things were different, we can, of course, get into the historical context and the social impact. Again, excuse the misspellings. When we got to get into Garvey, even though this was, right at the beginning of World War I. We got to talk about, how the differences between how the Niagara movement later on the NAACP spoke to a certain audience, but how Garvey's movement, the UNIA, they spoke to a huge audience, right? The folks that didn't feel like they could be really connected to the NAACP because maybe they were a little bit elite, or maybe they just didn't fit in, or maybe they just felt like, that was for that, yeah, that's for my people, but I want to get into some a little bit more, engaging. Garvey, you got to bring them up. But then, of course, we can talk about other social impacts that the soldiers had, and that all the other things that were going on that indicated a change. The things that were happening in the theater, etc. And so, how do we get students to visualize these and then engage with them together? And one of the ways is there's a really cool platform called Blockade Labs. And Blockade Labs allows you to create something called a skybox. A skybox is basically a 360 environment that allows you to, with a textual prompt, create an environment that will contain whatever you've incorporated into the prompt. Now, I've been using Blockade Labs for a long time, and you can see all the different environments here based on the various projects or the lessons that I'm teaching that I've created. And sometimes you have to change your prompt just a little bit to get what you want. And students learn that. So when you think about the writing that they have to do and the descriptive nature of that writing in order to get the visualization that they want, and how they need to become prompt engineers in some respect, or at least begin to learn that skill, it's writing, and that's all a part of that standard that I just told you about. And so one of the ones that I did on the Harlem Renaissance was really quite fun. And let's see if we can view this very quickly. Here we go. And so, based on the description here, and you can see, immerse yourself in a bustling Harlem downtown during the vibrant 1920s jazz age, lined with cabarets, theaters, and nightclub buildings, exuding history and ivy cascading down age walls. blah, 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 right? And so you can see here that based on that description, we got a very interesting looking urban setting. Now, of course, it's not exactly Harlem, but when you think about the inspirations that students are reading about, right? When you think about the urban part of Kane, in talking about the concrete and the tall buildings and everything, this gives them that visual context, in addition to their imagination, but it gives them that visual context of maybe some of the things that might have inspired the writing. When you think about Langston and some of the poetry that he wrote, Jazzonia, or any of those that he wrote about some of the clubs, that were so descriptive, and when students can't really understand the lights and the cars and the traffic and the music and people, pouring out of nightclubs, although we don't see that here. Here is where, by getting them to describe that, or even a scene or a setting out of an assigned reading, it really gets them to, to understand not only the power of words, but how their words, the descriptive nature of their words, can really be quite interesting. And you can see that this aligns with the this text alignment on analyzing historical and social and economic contexts, and how that helps shape text that they're reading. So think about how to immerse students visually in a space, or we can create something that is more collaborative in nature. Now, there's a really cool platform that I've used for a number of years now called Spatial. And again, if your districts or your school allows access to this particular site, it is really quite good. This is, in many respects, the evolution of Second Life, where we have a massive multi user environment where people can bring in their own assets and build things. They can create experiences, interactive experiences, without necessarily having to know a lot of coding. But if they do know coding, they can even make that experience better. They can have collaborative experiences, but also you can bring in 2D things like video recordings or audio files or whatever the case might be. Now, I bring my students here to experience Harlem in pieces, and so this demo space that hopefully will come up in just a second will show you some of the assets from the original Virtual Harlem project. And yeah, as soon as this finishes rendering, the original Virtual Harlem. Oops. I don't know if y'all can hear that or not. I hear it. It's one of my students' audio files that basically was a part of this. And so I'm just going to walk away so I won't hear that too much. But basically, you can hear that there's so many different ways that students can explore their understanding of a topic when they are able to incorporate audio files or video files or anything that may be a slide presentation, all from within a visual context that gives you a different sense of understanding of that particular space. And so virtual Harlem can be, experienced in pieces, but it can also then, sort of reinforce some of the things that students are learning in a very real sense. Let me just going to mute that audio. And so students are able to come in this space. They can teleport to other spaces. We can zoom in and zoom out, and I won't show you what my avatar looks like. It's basically a younger, more muscular version of me in my senior citizen shape. But here's where they can bring in all these different things related to the research that they've done, whether it be images or paintings of the period, as you can see here. They can do presentations within the space, and all of them can create accounts and spend as much time as they can here. So when you think about the collaborative nature of some of these spaces, Spatial is one of them. Engage is another one. Victory XR, another one. And so when you think about accessing these spaces, you can do so on a computer, you can do so on a tablet or a mobile device, or if your school has access to VR headsets, you can fully immerse yourself in this space. Now, the reason I even brought up Spatial is because it has one thing that some of the other platforms don't necessarily have, and that is you can press a button when you're on your mobile device. You can press a button and you can bring all of these content assets into your real space. So it has a really cool augmented reality feature that when you hit that button, you can see the Abyssinian church floating over here. You can see all of your classmates in your living room or in your classroom, wherever you happen to access that, or all the other assets, the videos, the audios, the images, all in your real space. And then the application either allows you to navigate the space on your screen where you can teleport closer to these different works of art or these different assets. Or if you have the room and if it's safe, you can physically get up and walk towards those assets. So it's fully functional with regards to its 3D nature. So just again, giving you an example of how these spaces can be accessed and how you can build on these with having very little knowledge of programming or anything like that. There are educator accounts which are free, and if you are cognizant or competent with Unity construction or the video game engine called Unity, you can build in Unity and import your scene into spatial, and then you make use of all of the interactive functionality that's already built into spatial, and you don't have to worry about trying to find a multi-user server that will house your Unity experience. So they've made it really, really easy to be able to access these spaces with other students. So spatial is really cool. I think you'll enjoy it, and I think it definitely is one that will align with your curriculum standards. All right. So the multimodal literacy, excuse the spelling one more time. I'm so sorry about that. The multimodal literacy is so very important also, I think, with regards to getting students to, sort of comprehensively understand this movement outside of it just being a literary movement or even a literary and performance movement, right? There were so many things going on. And when we just choose three categories, imagery and video and audio, we can actually have students creating some very, very cool stuff. So, for instance, if you've not played around with any of the text to image generators, please do so. And this is just four of the dozens and dozens of them that are out there. Some of them are free, some of them are freemium, which means you have a certain amount of things you can do for free. And then if you want the more advanced features, you have to pay a small amount. And then the more advanced features, you have to pay a little bit more. And some of them are totally paid. So it really just depends on which ones you access or how much searching you do. Believe me, there are more of them out there, and I discover more almost every day. So let me just show you a couple of these for those of you that aren't quite as cognizant of these. And one of them is called Crayon. The link is there. And basically, these tools are so cool that if you wanted to generate something, let's see what we can generate here. How about a uh, oops, let's see. Yeah, in the Okay, something really simple. Let's see what it can draw here. And you can see there, you can either draw an image, you can do something that's photorealistic, you can do a vector image. So depending on what students sort of gravitate to, it's nothing wrong with having them having one of these things draw a cartoon image of, say, a portion of Harlem, because maybe through that cartoon image, they might, it might sort of identify something that can be a topic of conversation. And it's really kind of, quite interesting to see what these tools generate based on how detailed or how lack of detail the prompt incorporates. And by teaching students those kinds of skills, it not only reinforces or helps them understand, the period or the subject that you're teaching, but also helps them understand how to get to the content that's overall being generated by making whatever changes are necessary. And you can see here that by just, that very, very simple prompt I put in here, it gave me instrumentalists. And it's probably pulling from images, a combination of images that it's finding on the web, mashing some of those together and creating these images of these individuals. Now, here is where we can have a really cool conversation about copyright and about, the where these training materials are coming from. And I think that's so very relevant with regards to how information and activities and content was pirated, or how others took ownership of that during this period. And so the similarities between, where something is being trained and how it's being used, either with or without permission, is very interestingly similar to a conversation that we can have about where modern jazz came from, where modern rock came from, how R&B, how gospel inspired X, Y, and Z, or how the blues, inspired. So the conversations that can be generated through these kinds of tools, whether you like them or not, it is really quite interesting. And so to have students create images, one of the assignments that I have in my own classes, and this is not only my Harlem Renaissance classes, but also my African American Lit class, is just this, where students have to use any of the themes that we find in the literary assignments that are assigned, use any of the themes from the novels or short stories, etc., and incorporate that theme into a prompt that will either generate an image, a video, or an audio file. And then once that generation is finished and they are happy with it, they have to tell me how that image relates right back to the class. Okay. So it gives them not only this idea of creating something based on their description, their prompt, but also critically analyzing what was generated and how that relates back to the course content in some very interesting way. Another one of the tools that you'll find to be quite interesting is this other text to image generator called Flux. And as I mentioned before, I just clicked on a couple of the ones that I've used in the past. And so another one that generates, just different types of images. Now, depending on if you're using a U.S. company or a foreign-based company, there are different regulations that these platforms tend to adhere to. The US companies, they will not, or it's more difficult to get them to recreate historical figures or famous or political figures or anything like that. Some copyrighted material you might find a challenge to recreate accurately. However, some of the foreign entities, those guardrails aren't in place, and so you can create any likeness of anyone. That's really quite interesting. So if you decide to curate some of these for your students, give them limited choices that they can access to create these assignments, you'll want to kind of keep that in mind with regards to where those are headquartered and what kind of guardrails are there. Now, of course, there's another caveat that we all have to be familiar with, and that is the inappropriate images or videos that can be created with these particular tools. Some of them have very, very thick guardrails where they will not allow, nude images or lewd images or violence or anything like that. Some of them, it's a free for all, and so it really just depends. Again, excuse me, on which platform you choose, and the assignment that you give to your students. So once again, I really encourage you to try some of these, and then do a search for others, because this is really literally the tip of the iceberg. The text to video generators are also extremely exciting, and it's getting much, much better than it was of the example that we saw of Will Smith eating spaghetti, which was horrible. But at the time, people thought it was cool because all you had to do was describe Will Smith eating spaghetti, and then it generated this horrible video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, but it generated a video. The text to video generators now are so good. I mean, when Sora came out, this is the one that's created by OpenAI. When it first came out, my jaw was hanging open. I couldn't believe that this was AI. You could see little flaws, but for the most part, I was blown away. Some of these others are amazing. Kling being probably one of the better ones. It is a foreign-based company, and Pika. being a very good one as well. And so you can see here just some of the projects that I generated in Pika Labs. And let's see if we can get this a little bit bigger. There you go. And I think the text was, or the prompt was, people dancing and having a party at a cabaret in Harlem, New York during the 1920s jazz age, a photorealistic, extreme detail, true color, although it did black and white, 360 room, painting the room slowly, cabaret, beautifully colored and decorated 1920 style. So it did all of that except for the color. And maybe it thought that, hey, well, if it's 1920s, it's black and white. But look at what this did. And this was a little while ago that I did this. This might have been about a year ago, that I, well, maybe 6 months ago, that I generated this one, and it's gotten better since then. So when I think about the way that we can then have students generate something that's based on maybe the autobiography of an ex-colored man, or maybe something that was generated during the actual Harlem Renaissance, somewhere between 1920 and 1935. One of the many novels or short stories. Have them generate something that will help them visualize or bring into motion some of those scenes, which would really be a cool assignment. And I do it all the time. Kling, as I mentioned before, that other video generator that I was telling you about. And just let me show you the detail here that this generates. I'm just going to turn the audio off, but this is all AI that you're seeing here. And of course, the penguin carrying a briefcase. We know that's AI, but look at the detail here, and you can see the prompt that was generated in the top right corner. Animals as colleagues going into elevators and things like that. But the quality of these video generations based on a textual prompt is really quite amazing. And Kling and Pika are, again, two of the many that are out there. Google has one out. Sora is out there by OpenAI that's free now, and there are countless others. And I put several links here that hopefully you'll be able to explore that will take you through some of these text to video generators. And finally, text to audio generators. And here's where your students can really have a good time by generating audio based on some of the descriptors that they have of different environments, of different cabarets, of the different types of jazz. If you tend to focus most of your methods and your instruction on the development of jazz or music of the period. And see, I know that because we all have different areas of specialty, whether it's history or music or sociology or literature. And if we're teaching the Harlem Renaissance, we tend to, maybe focus maybe a little bit more so on that which we're comfortable with, right? If it's music, and we'll maybe highlight maybe more of that kind of content as we're talking about the movement as a whole. So here's where you can have students generate lyrics or audio or files based on some of those things that they may imagine hearing in the Cotton Club or in Connie's Inn or in Small's Paradise or in any of the number of clubs that were so very popular, but yet played very, very different music. Even if you talked about rent parties, you could get into some of that and have students generate something based on a description of the kind of music they would hear in a rent party. So the possibilities are literally endless with regards to that which students can generate in just three categories. Now there's several others that are possible, which will allow students to do some even more interesting things with AI. You can analyze text. You can do all kinds of things that are more traditional if you wanted students to do that, and have the AI do it. You can even incorporate Notebook LM, which is a Google product. And as students are taking notes in your class, they can import those notes into Notebook LM, and it will create a podcast for them. And then you can hit another button, and those podcast hosts that are talking about the students' notes, it'll bring them into the conversation. So in addition to hearing two artificial hosts talk about a student generated notes, it'll ask the students questions about what they thought about X, Y, and Z. And depending on what they typed, it will then tell them, well, that's pretty good, or well, I'm not sure about that, or well, that's pretty good. You might also think about whatever. And it gives the students a chance to have a conversation with their own notes. I mean, it really is getting quite exciting. And so when you hear the excitement in my voice about the possibilities of I know that there are a whole lot of, things that we should be concerned about, rightly so. But there are a whole lot of things that we can be very, very excited about, in my opinion. And then, of course, we've got these additional resources, and please, we can never discount things like that are the very traditional, whether it be the Texas Humanities resources that I had to put in there, or some of the other things by the Library of Congress or even the Kennedy Center, all of which you can incorporate into your classrooms for a variety of assignments, not only to complement what you're teaching them in a more traditional form, but also that which can be used in some of these AI platforms. So I think you'll definitely enjoy those kinds of incorporations. Okay. All right, so we are about at 4:57 my time, probably 5:57 your time. I know Laura and Elizabeth have probably been flagging me down, but I told y'all when I get focused on a topic that I get very excited about, sometimes I don't see the chat window. So I do apologize if you've been chatting with me, telling me to shut up. But I do so.
You're all good.
So thank
All
you
good.
all very, very much. I do appreciate it. If you want to check out the Center for Digital Humanities website, I encourage you to go there. You can check out some of our projects. If you have any questions whatsoever, I answer all emails, sometimes to a fault, but I will always answer your emails should you have any questions. So the floor is open for questions, and I'd be more than happy to answer any of them that you may have regarding anything that we've talked about or any other topics, either related to the Harlem Renaissance or related to the incorporation of technology into the teaching and learning of this topic.
We had one question in the chat already from Amy,
Okay.
whether virtual Harlem is available for students to walk through today.
Yes, it is. So you can basically, it's not a, it's always a work under construction. So if you contact me, Amy, I'll be more than happy to send you the APK file for a VR headset. It'll work with the Meta 2 and the Meta 3. Or if you just have PCs, I can send you the executable, and it will allow you to run it on a PC. There's no Mac version yet. I'm sorry, but if you would like to contact me, we can get that sent to you. Other questions here. Let's see. My district blocks off most of these sites. Yeah, I know. The one way that you can get around that. I don't know if your district allows you to do this, but if you bring in a VPN or use a VPN, sometimes that'll help. Or sometimes you can get the district with a letter. And I've had some teachers do this in the past. Send a letter justifying why they want to access a certain site, and the district IT will whitelist that particular site if they can, if there's a good enough justification for its educational uses. So yeah, and I do apologize for, yes, some districts are just very strict, and they will not allow access to some of these sites, but some they do. Let's see. Please drop questions. Okay, thank you. How long does it take for your students to generate one of your assignments? Well, I give students several weeks to generate assignments, and because they have different expectations or objectives, the length of time or the length differentiates based on the assignment. So if I have them creating a skybox, we can do that in class. Or if I have them creating a skybox and doing something with that, then I might give them, the week to do that based on the readings that we're doing. We do something called the signature assignment, which has them creating 4 to 6 images, videos, or audio files, and they have the entire semester to do that because they're all based on the themes from the texts that we read throughout the semester. And so they get inspiration throughout the semester that this assignment is a constantly growing one that starts at the beginning and it evolves throughout the entire term. Can you share the video with others? I don't mind if you like. I have no problems. You talk with Laura and Elizabeth about that, but I have no problem you sharing any of this video. If you only had the ability to share one primary source about the Harlem Renaissance with your students, what would it be? Primary source about the Harlem Renaissance, I would say when Harlem was in vogue. I think to me, David Levering Lewis's storytelling ability is one that resonates, I think, with students, and it's not so heavy on the theoretical side or on any other side that turns students off. I love to tell a good story. I love listening to a good story. And David Levering Lewis tells a good story. To include a lot of the the historic characters and the historic context around the creation of various things, whether it be events like the Civic Club banquet or whether it be anything else, like the incorporation of people coming to Harlem to slum for the weekend, or the controversies surrounding the N-word heaven. I won't say the word, but you know what I'm talking about, the N-word heaven, and all of those. And so I think that when you talk about David Levering Lewis's work, that's probably, although it's older, it's probably one of the ones I would recommend. Other than Marcus Garvey, who are your top historical figures you mentioned? Let's see, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, Charles S. Johnson, Alain Locke would be among those that are at the very top. Georgia Douglas Johnson, Jesse Fawcett would also be among those at the very top. When you think about the role of women and the marginalization of women, you won't see as many that are referenced in many of the anthologies, but I definitely think that people like Jesse Fawcett and some of the others that played a part in the editorials for either the Crisis or the Opportunity magazine. I think there is this huge sort of gap that we have in the role of women. So, but those are some of the top figures that I would recommend. Let's see. What has been a favorite project that your students have completed regarding the Harlem Renaissance? Perhaps I can do a non AI version of it. Let's see. So, my favorite project has really been things that they've done inside of spatial. I found that when students, can create a presence, but then they have a space where they can drag videos into it, or they can drag PowerPoint presentations into it. Actually, Google Slides, but they can drag audio files, podcasts, images, 3D objects that they found or that some have created. I find that this visual, contextual, multi-user environment gives students a lot of leeway with regard, a lot of flexibility with regards to the type of ways that they can express their understanding of a particular topic. So in that spatial environment, I've got many, many rooms. Sound like something from the Bible, right? I got many mansions, right? No, but I got a lot of rooms that students can sort of teleport into, and so they can create their own room that has, it could be the inside of a club, if they wanted to create that, or it can be a series of images that could represent an art gallery, because we focus quite a bit on the amazing art of some of the individuals that were quite popular during that period. Let's see. Canva is approved, and I think I can use that platform. Yes, Canva does have an AI, a text to image generator. I don't think they do video, but definitely they do text to image. So yeah, you could definitely use Canva for something like that. If you can get to Google, and if Google is allowed, Google has a space called Google Labs, and if you have your students create an account on Google Labs, there's a text to video, text to image, text to audio creation, as well as a number of other tools that are, they're publicly available, but they're not like out in the open web. You have to sort of register for it, and then they allow you access, but anyone who does it can pretty much get access. Your students can do that as well. So Google Labs, if that's not blocked, I would highly recommend that for you. Did I get everybody's question? I don't know if I got everything, but are there other questions? Let's see, a couple more. How familiar are you with students? How familiar are your students with these technologies before taking your classes? Probably not much at all. Very few students have access, or that get into virtual worlds, unless it's Roblox or was it Minecraft. So they're kind of familiar with that, but focusing these on, say, a historic environment like virtual Harlem, that's a little bit different. So it takes them a bit to shift their minds from either a multiplayer game that they're shooting everybody, or capture the flag or whatever, versus something that they're going to explore and learn and things like that. When I use augmented reality, not very familiar at all. And it takes a class or two to get them, sort of in the mindset that they can take a 3D object, put it into a platform, scan a QR code, and now they see that 3D object floating in front of them. So that takes a little bit. But students don't take very long to catch on to this, and the different platforms that are out there, the learning curve has gotten pretty flat. And so you can go through some tutorials yourself and become familiar enough that you'll be able to not only introduce your students to these tools, but also help them troubleshoot. And then I also encourage my students to always, if they're running into problems, look for the FAQ or send the developers an email. And so you get them used to communicating with those who created a platform as opposed to becoming frustrated and not thinking that they can fix it. It may be a bug, and now they pointed this out to someone. So I get them used to doing those kinds of things. Let's see. In your opinion, what is the essence of the Harlem Renaissance that I can or attempt to portray for my students? I would say the essence would be that this was a period of controversial change. And when I say controversial change, there were those powers that be that didn't want any changes. On both the black side and the white side, there were sort of changes that were going on that were very positive in nature, and there were some that were sort of a backlash against some of those changes. But I would say controversial change is really quite interesting because we see very marked differences between the antebellum and the postbellum period, then moving into the 20th century and the radical nature in the minds of some of the ideas that were spread by Du Bois. Some of the organizations were seen as radical, and then of course the way that that Du Bois sort of encouraged black people to become involved in the war effort. And so these changes that were coming online were dramatic. I mean, just the difference between the publication of James Weldon Johnson's novel in 1912, Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, and the fact that not much else was published between then and 1919 is remarkable in and of itself. Yeah, the war got in the way, but the fact that you really didn't have much, and then after 1919, oh my gosh, you can fill volumes with all the stuff that was produced in all those different categories. And so this idea of change is really quite interesting. And when you can have students begin to point out some of those changes, identify them in various contexts, I think that's really quite the crux of the Renaissance. My guys really know the basics. Yeah, yeah, and some of those changes can reinforce the basics. We have that which happened with World War One. Well, many might know what got World War One started off and how we took so long to get involved in it. But then maybe many might not know the African American involvement in World War One. The prominence of the war of the Hellfighters and all the ways that these black troops made a dent or made an impact to the French citizens, which basically sort of helped launch the Jazz Age because the French fell in love with jazz, and so all these things connect to one another in various ways. But they were changes, and they were very very different than that which was happening or the status quo. Which piece of literature from the Harlem Renaissance is your number one favorite to teach and your students' favorite to learn and discuss? Well, I know they love the work of Langston, the poetry of Langston. And when they think about when, sort of, I introduce Langston as, the sort of, father of spoken word and hip hop, that's what really gets their ears going. So then we look at some of the poetry that is similar to that of, say, Kendrick Lamar or any of the other modern day spoken word artists, but yet it was just done during a different period. Then when they hear some of his work set to jazz and blues, it blows them away. So that's one of my favorite authors. But I also love Nella Larson. Oh my gosh, I love Passing and Quicksand. When I think about the tragic nature of that and how Passing was still such a prominent activity even into the 1920s and 30s, and then when they see the movie Pinky and oh, what's the other one, Imitation of Life, and they relate that to that which was going on in Passing, and that's which was happening in Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. It really gets them excited, and then when they can go watch the movie Passing, I have them read the novel first and then watch the movie. But when they would come watch the movie passing, which was actually really well done, I thought. And then we start talking about the mystery. Somebody who died at the end, and did she get killed, or did she fall out the window, or whatever the case might be. So those are at least two of the works that I think they get some really really. Yet passing is very relevant now. You're absolutely right. Thank you. When your students are creating prompts to dictate the AI images, what guidance or rubrics do they have to help them know if they are accurate representations? I'm curious to what extent middle school or high school students would be able to self evaluate. Well, I think two things are in place here. One, I always focus the students to make sure that they include one or more of the themes that are prevalent in whatever the reading assignment is. That sort of keeps some of the guardrails there, as opposed to having them create sort of an ad hoc prompt that may be loosely related to the period or the topic that you're studying. So incorporating a theme will help, sort of focus their prompt writing. Also, almost every one of the platforms nowadays has AI prompt assistance. And so if students are sort of stuck on how to make their image better, they can hit that little icon that looks like an AI thing, whether it's wands or whatever, and the AI will help improve the prompt that they started. And so they can get practice on prompt writing by clicking that little button, and the prompt will then give them a more descriptive text on how to create a street scene, with the lights and the volumetrics and the rain and the whatever that the student may not necessarily have thought about. They do that a couple of times. The next time they do it, they're going to remember camera angle, focal lens, or type of film, or a type of rendering, or being more descriptive in the scene, the weather, the way that people are dressed, and being very very cognizant of the small details that are described in, say, a novel that they're reading, that in some cases they may just sort of bypass with regards to an author describing, say, a setting. Well, now they're going to pay more close attention to that, because that's part of what they need to then learn the skill of to create a very good prompt. So that may help. Other questions?
We got time for maybe one more.
Okay. No other questions? Okay.
All right. Well,
Well,
thank you.
again, I do encourage you, if any of you are interested in obtaining the APK or having some access to Virtual Harlem, please just shoot me an email, and I'll send you the link to where you can download that and incorporate that or sideload that onto your headsets. If you need the PC version, make sure you indicate that, and I can send you the same, or another download link to download an exe file for your PC. Otherwise, I love talking about this, and I could go on for a long, long time to talk about either the Renaissance or technology, and these are just a few of the tools that we've used in my classes. And I'd be more than happy to talk with you individually if you'd like more information about different tools, or maybe just some other suggestions. So please feel free to email me if you do have those questions. Okay. Thank you all very, very much, and thank
Thank
you,
you
Elizabeth
so
and Laura.
much. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Dr. Carter. We will post your contact email to